I think The Mandalorian and Grogu had everything it needed to be a great movie. It didn't need a new villain, it didn't need a new cameo, didn't need any new action set pieces, didn't even need a new resolution. It just started in the wrong place. Because this is where it needed to start to actually have an emotional impact throughout the whole thing. We didn't need the Imperial base, we didn't need the Republic mission off the bat. It wasn't even the search for Rada. This was the first place that the movie asked a real, deep, emotional question. Can Grogu save his father? And it almost takes 2 hours before we get that answer, but we don't really ask the question until midway through the film. Simply put, all the emotional impact that could have had is lost by the time it takes place. And we feel rushed through that saving moment because we only see it for a short amount of time. So here's what I'm thinking. I don't want to rewrite the film. I'm not adding any scenes. I'm not really adjusting many sequences. I'm not changing much of the plot really at all. All I'm doing is doing a reorder, a rearrangement of the basics of what's already there. There are a couple of things I think could be added to strengthen it, but overall, I think there's a good movie in there. So really, we're gonna take the exact same scenes that are from the film and see if we can increase the emotional impact of the theme that I think makes the strongest case or the strongest pull or the strongest through line for what we really think is good about Mandalorian and Grogu all the way back from season 1, and it's their relationship. The unlikely father-son relationship of two outcasts, if you will. So every movie makes a promise. There's always something that leads you through the beginning. There's really, really strong examples of this. And if you know anything about structure or story narrative or anything like that, you might have come across in media res, which is a Latin term for basically saying dropping in the middle of things. And we've seen a really recent example of this with The Odyssey. You've seen it in Fight Club. You've seen it in Sunset Boulevard. You've seen it in even things like James Bond movies, Mission Impossible 3, and many others. In most cases in those films, it's usually asking a question of the long-term relevance of what this character is going to deal with. It gives you a promise of the emotional experience you're about to embark on, right? An opening sequence is strong, like think Jaws or think Raiders of the Lost Ark. The dropping in the middle of things becomes the catalyst of why we invest in said character, why we invest in said plot. It teaches us something about the world, it teaches us something about the person, and it also sets the stakes most times. The shark will eat you, or there's always a booby trap. But with that said, in The Mandalorian and Grogu, the current promise that you get is that Mandalorian is introduced. You get him as an introductionary character, as if you haven't watched the shows, and he does some action and kind of gets in the mix of it. So maybe there's an argument to be say in media res is there already, but I think that there's a way that you can shift that to make it a little more effective and more accurate to that historical narrative structure and plot device. Because what I actually think the movie was trying to be about and was not super effective in conveying was that this is an almost coming-of-age story for Grogu. And if it's not that, it's at least the building of his independence in regards to his father figure. Because taking him back away from Luke in the season before this, kind of, not really effectively because it was off screen somewhat, it comes down to the fact that the thing that made us like their relationship to begin with was because they were two separate outcasts coming together to support each other. And that buddy cop feeling, that friendship building that's now turned into a father-son thing is really powerful. It speaks to something way deeper than just, a couple of fun characters and a cute merchandising opportunity. And so Grogu becoming something of an independent in regards to the love of his father, then he has to learn to trust his dad. And Din has to learn to trust Grogu. And they have to enter these situations where, hey, he has to wear his armor. He has to be able to hold his own. He has to be able to make the most of his capabilities, including with the Force, which Din doesn't fully understand, but he knows that he can benefit from it and it can save him in tight situations. But the father and son saving each other, the movie doesn't begin there. The movie doesn't give Grogu any agency right off the bat. It really doesn't deal with Grogu much at all in the beginning, right? He's just kind of part of what's happening. He's not a main character. Now, as you get further in the film, I make the argument that he is a main character and that they're actually trying to make him the central piece of this film where he's his journey is actually the most important. Because even though it's called The Mandalorian and Grogu, I actually think they wanted to lean more on Grogu, but, can't leave The Mandalorian away from that because that tight relationship is what people grew to love. So with that said, the first emotional, inciting instant that feels like we could do in media res and jump right into the mix of things and find that gripping intro is actually with the twins. The Hutts are the real villain. They're the intensity, they're the tension, they're the thing that is going to have to be overcome to accomplish the story, to find our resolution. And so we can start there to find the protagonist right in the mix of things. Really, this takes place in close to the last act of the movie, if not the beginning of the third act, depending on how you slice it. But it's the most powerful scene of low point of, oh man, the hero is in a predicament. So all you have to do is you take, in this new opening, you just take the sequence of Mandalorian with his capture in the twins' palace, removing his helmet, getting thrown into the snake pit, getting hit or bit by the poison, and getting thrown out through the water. Grogu choosing to stay and try and save him is like, he's poisoned, he's stuck, he looks like he's dying. What is Grogu going to do? How is he going to save his father? That's your opening. That's the thing that's going to make it feel intense. We're going to get right into the action. We're going to be with Mandalorian Grogu right off the bat. We don't need to start with some random villain that's going to disappear within the first 10 minutes. We don't need a montage of Mandalorian being good at what he does. We know that. Even if you haven't seen the show, you at least know, based on his armor alone, that he knows what he's doing and that he's good at what he's doing. We don't need to spend all this expository time getting to a certain point. Literally dropping us right in the middle of the problem, which is this idea of, hey, we're going to do a 3 days earlier, and we're going to build up to this. We're going to say, nope, simple in media res. We're going to do a 3 days earlier right after the title card, and we're going to be questioning whether or not Din's going to survive the poison from the snake. That's our stakes. Because at that point, now what you've set up, now the promise that you've given us for the whole film is Din and Grogu's relationship, and how is Grogu going to step up to save his father. That's way more compelling than an episodic serial step-by-step of adventures, which is how the show's set up, which fair enough. And even though there's been some, talk from the executives and the people who wrote it to make the movie from scratch and it not being from episodes and all this stuff, I still think all of the material is pulled from a season 4 of Mandalorian, which fair enough. I mean, that's the stuff he had to work with. I don't blame them for doing that. Again, that's just conjecture. So that leads us to just having a dramatic question right at the beginning of the film. Why did Mandalorian get stuck in this palace? Why is he talking to these two Hutts? And the twins, if you've seen Clone Wars and stuff like that, you kind of have run across them. You're kind of excited because that's the first cameo, if you will. But why is this happening? What's coming from all of this tension? Is he going to be saved? Is Grogu going to get him out of it and to get him an antidote? Or is he going to die? And it's going to be Grogu's story for the rest of the time, which that would have been pretty bold. So you're going to get the titles card right at the end of this opening. So up to this point, all you've seen is just tension and an intense, oh man, is Din going to survive? Can Grogu step up? That's it. It's new still. It's going to be fresh. It's going to feel like, whoa, where are we? You've got the title card. You've got the music. That is going to give that Star Wars punch right off the bat, right? That's going to feel more like an intro to Raiders of the Lost Ark or Jaws or some of these other films like Fight Club or Sunset Boulevard or even a Mitchell versus the Machines. So 3 days earlier, immediately start with the theatrical cut. Imperial base, Imperial villains, a little bit of montage with the Mandalorian doing what he does best, right? Because now at this point, the 3 days earlier kind of gives us, okay, this is where he's been, and this is what's leading us up to his problem, which is that he's poisoned in some random forest outside a Hutt palace, and we don't know if he's going to survive. And so at that point, the montage, the intro, that has more weight already. Our emotional impact is heightened because we're wondering if he's going to survive, and we need to see what happens up to that point. And I know this isn't anything fancy. I know this isn't brilliant or a genius move in regards to writing this script over. But what I'm trying to get at is that they actually wrote a good movie in here. They just rearranged it the wrong way. So you're going to get the Imperial Assault. You're going to get Mandalorian coming back. You're going to get him talking to the commander. She's going to send him off to do this new mission. He's going to get the new Razor Crest. You could have all the same beats that happen at the beginning of the film in the theatrical version, just same order even. You don't even have to change that aspect of it. because we need that intro of the Republic. We need him to be around Zeb. We need him to be around the commander. All these characters have to be introduced. Like, that's fine. It's all good. And that's simple, and it feels good for Star Wars fans. It's simple enough for people who don't know what's going on. But the thing that you change throughout this whole sequence is you intercut scenes of Grogu in the forest, moving Din around, getting him covered by the bark and tree and limbs and things, avoiding capture, starting to look around, looking for help. All of that's intercut. And we only do it every so often. You don't want to do it too much that it starts taking away from the 3 days earlier. But you can definitely understand. You wouldn't have to say, oh, present 3 days, present 3 days. Because as film goers, as film viewers, we would understand, oh, that's where we are. That's what we're flashing back between. It would be very obvious. You know where the forest is, you know what happened in the beginning, and that's it. That's all you needed. And there's no dialogue there. Grogu's not talking, there's no interesting thing there. It's literally just musical intercuts between all of this part of the first act, if you will. And it also gives us that time is of the essence feeling, because we still recognize, oh, Din is dying from the poison. What is he gonna do? In each cutback, you realize Grogu is taking agency. He's taking an independence. He's learning to act upon his own will to save the father. So the last cutback of Grogu trying to save Din in this section would shift us, right? There'd be a turning point. Maybe it's when he finally gets him covered, or maybe it's when he finally goes off to look for an antidote. But the second act would start here, and you'd get the trip to Nal Hutta, the actual twins, the marketplace section, the Shikari meetup, the arena where he sees Rada in the arena for the first time, finding out who Janu is, trying to go find Janu, trying to talk to Janu, and getting into the Rada conversation when he's in his prison cell, getting captured, going into the arena to fight Rada, the fact that Rada tells him who Janu and Commander Corrin actually are, the actual arrest of Commander Corrin, and then you'd switch back and you'd have this return to Mavara, which we would get the characters that have not been gone for very long, that are part of the Republic. He would have to hide Rada from them some, and then you'd end this second act with that Ambo ambush. Now, throughout this still, cutting between Grogu's and Din's experience in the forest, we still understand the time elements going against this, what it's actually becoming harder and harder for him to figure out how to save Din. But we've definitely saw him refuse to quit, and we've seen him expand his search parameter until he's going to come across the guy at the dock, the alien at the dock, the fisherman. Something that could strengthen this point with the fisherman is if you had found a place in the early Imperial Salt stuff to have one more lesson from Din to Grogu about asking for help, about taking initiative, about finding a way when there is none. I think there could be a philosophical underpinning through this whole film of this coming of age feeling of like, hey, you have the capability of reaching for something. A good example would be, I've had a professor tell me when I was studying deeply in graduate school that once you read a book, you are the book. And that statement is a really interesting open-ended generalization, but what it's actually telling you is that once you've learned something, you can apply it, and it's become a part of your knowledge. And when that knowledge is actually used practically, you have independence. And so if we could see that play out with Grogu from the beginning of the film, and then he gets to this fisherman point and you have him remember this moment, all of a sudden you get the very quintessential simplified version of a coming of age story. He gets that agency, he gets that independence, and he's able to save Din with the antidote from the fisherman. So at this point, if he has this full circle moment of learning the lesson, applying said lesson, and actually being successful with said lesson, now we've caught up. You cut back throughout for Grogu and Din's relationship to kind of show agency for Grogu, and he's gonna wake him up, he's gonna save him, the antidote's all done, and there you are. You've caught back up to your 3 days earlier, you're in media res, and you're saying, hey, we can just move forward from here, and we can have a third act that's full of payoff that we've set up correctly to rely on an underlying relational story versus relying on spectacle. So the third act would then include the fisherman and the antidote and Din recovering, the choice to fight instead of run, the assault on the palace, Din versus Envo, the droid battle, the freeing of Rada, the confronting of the twins, their demise, which is really satisfying, by the way. The Republic arriving. And this is where I got this idea for this whole rearrangement, because the emotional impact of the Return of the Republic feels unearned in the theatrical version. There's just something about it that feels off. It's like we haven't seen these characters for like an hour and a half. Where have they been? What are they doing? Why are they just all of a sudden gonna show up to the palace? And yeah, sure, they explain it away in some throwaway expository lines, but if you've done this rearrangement, it won't feel as long, right? Because we've seen them within like 30 to 45 minutes prior. And so you get the buildup a little stronger, and you realize that the agency of Grogu is directly correlated to the agency of Jin, which is directly correlated to the relational building he's been doing in the Republic, right? There's like a tiered system of how you interact with your world that's at play at that point. Can you take care of yourself? Can you do it with Jordan Peterson and clean your room? Can you hold yourself up with your shoulders back? Okay, cool. Can you make a better relationship with your family? Can you understand your familial relationships? Can you be a good brother, sister, husband, wife? And then what does that look like to your extended family? What does that look like to your community, your neighborhood, your town, your city, your state, your nation state? Then you're a good person, right? That's the through line. The Republic being the nation state, the highest level of, are we helping the world on a large foundational level by eliminating this crime family from contention, which is what ends up happening because they get eaten by a snake. So then we're just finishing off the film just like it did. There's no change in the third act. It's literally just the Republic wins. They get him off the planet. The conspiracy gets explained. All of the loose ends get tied up, if you will. Rada joins the Republic. He and Zeb are going to be friends. And then we get one final lesson, which is a catalyst of trust has been built between this father and son. They've found an element of camaraderie and understanding, and he teaches them how to fly the Razor Crest. And it means something deeper because we've anchored the rest of the story on that relationship. The reason you watch The Mandalorian and Grogu is for the relationship between the Mandalorian and Grogu. It's not for the spectacle. That's great, that's nice, it's candy on top of all of the rest of it. But by just making one change, by just focusing the film, the backbone of the film on that, now we have a stronger emotional impact. Because instead of what's the mission, what's the adventure, how did Din end up here? There's a mystery there. And instead of Grogu being kind of peripheral, he's the integral aspect. He has the agency, and he becomes the protagonist throughout, even without dialogue. Every success that we've seen up to the point of this poison feels a little bit tainted or bittersweet because we know Din fails at this one point. Instead of getting the villain late in the film, the one that's actually going to give us a good payoff and feel like the most evil that we need and actually is connected to everything else, we get them immediately. They're terrifying, they're cruel, they're smart, and they're ahead of the game because they've beaten Din. So they become worthy, and then our payoff matters. So you got the Republic coming in and out, so you feel the pull, you feel that punch when they show up to save the day at the very end. Because the original movie just keeps changing objectives, if you will. And instead, mission, character, spectacle, whatever. Now you're anchoring everything. There's a backbone that moves it out of a television feel into a more cinematic experience. You have 2.5 hours to get us to feel an emotion. And when you do it episodically, that's not going to be as effective. Now every scene, every element of the film is leading towards Din and Grogu's relationship and whether or not Grogu can actually save Din. So I didn't really change much. The biggest lesson from this is that I didn't invent new scenes. I didn't change the ending. I didn't change the movie, really. I just changed the sequence of events that were already in place and had already been written and already been shot. You might have been able to, quote unquote, save this in the edit. Throwback to A New Hope. It's just the exact same events experienced in a different order, which becomes a completely different emotional journey. This movie, in the theatrical experience, lacked for me. There wasn't the emotional gut punch that I'm hoping for when it comes to large cinematic experiences. When I go to see a Star Wars movie, I'm expecting spectacle. I'm expecting fun fight scenes, I'm expecting cool worlds and neat aliens and cool spaceships and all of the things. But the reason those are all on screen is because we're dealing with fundamental human existential themes that create rewatchability, create depth and power, and this movie has those things in there. The elements exist within this movie. And when I immediately saw that Republic return, I thought to myself, they should have put this in a different order. And I hope that you agree, because I think that there's just enough here to have made a great movie, and a fan edit needs to be made that just rearranges this, because I think it would be way more effective. It just simply needed a change of where the emotional weight of the story should actually begin by using a really cliche narrative structure. So the question comes down to you. What do you think? You think I'm totally off base here? Or do you think this actually makes The Mandalorian Grogu a really great film? Let me know down in the comments. See you next time.